A humble janitor dressed in worn-out clothes was publicly humiliated by an arrogant millionaire in the lobby of a magnificent skyscraper. The millionaire offered him $50,000 to quit his job and disappear forever, certain the poor man would fail a simple challenge. But when the janitor's secret was revealed, the cruel laughter froze, and a shocking truth emerged that would shatter the millionaire's world and rewrite a forgotten history. Leo traced the rim of his chipped ceramic mug, the weak, lukewarm coffee, a familiar taste of his morning reality. It was a bitter brew, the kind that reminded him of bills unpaid and dreams deferred. His small apartment was a collection of second-hand furniture and mended clothes, a testament to a life lived on the very edge of solvency. Yet there was no despair in the room. There was only a quiet, resolute dignity. On the small, wobbly table next to him lay a worn photograph of his grandmother, her smile gentle even in the faded image. Her illness was a constant heavy weight on his heart, the reason for his double shifts, the motivation behind every floor he mopped and every window he cleaned. The doctors had given him a number, a figure so vast it felt like a cruel joke, the cost of the surgery that could save her life. Beside the photograph was an old, yellowed envelope. It was the only thing his grandfather had left him, a man he barely remembered, but whose stories of kindness and integrity were family legend. The envelope contained a single, crisp sheet of paper, folded neatly. It was a formal-looking document, filled with dense legal text that Leo had never fully understood. At the bottom was a single cryptic instruction. When all other hope is gone, take this to the central branch of Sterling Legacy Bank. Today, hope was a distant memory. The deadline for his grandmother's surgery deposit was looming, an impossible peak he could not climb. He picked up the envelope, its fragile paper cool against his calloused fingertips. This was it. This was his last desperate gamble. He had nothing to lose and a world, his grandmother's world, to gain. He put on his cleanest, though still threadbare jacket. It was a size too big, a relic from a charity shop, but he wore it like a suit of armor. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall, a ghost of a man with tired eyes, but a flicker of fire deep within them. He was not just a janitor. He was a grandson on a mission. The journey to the city center was a jarring transition from his world of gray concrete and struggling corner shops to an ocean of luxury. The Sterling Legacy Bank Tower was a shard of glass and steel that pierced the sky, a monument to a kind of wealth Leo could scarcely comprehend. Its polished brass doors gleamed, reflecting the frantic energy of the city, but they seemed to him like the gates to another universe. He pushed them open and stepped inside. The change was immediate. The noisy clamor of the street was replaced by an expensive silence, a hushed reverence broken only by the soft click of designer shoes on marble floors. The air itself smelled different, clean and faintly floral, the scent of money. The lobby was a vast cathedral-like space with a ceiling so high it seemed to hold its own weather. A magnificent grand piano, its black lacquer shining like a pool of dark water, sat in the center of the room, a silent king on a marble throne. Leo felt like a stain on a pristine white dress. Every head seemed to turn, every pair of eyes lingering on his worn shoes and frayed collar. He could feel their judgment, cold and sharp. He clutched the envelope in his pocket, its crinkled edges a small, solid comfort in this alien landscape. He approached the main reception desk, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The receptionist, a woman with immaculate hair and a dismissive expression, looked up from her computer, her gaze sweeping over him with thinly veiled contempt. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying he was a disruption, a problem to be solved and discarded. I was told to come here," Leo stammered, pulling the folded paper from its envelope. He slid it across the polished counter. "My grandfather? He left me this." The woman picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. Her eyes scanned the document, and a flicker of something, confusion, perhaps even annoyance, crossed her face. She looked back at Leo, then at the paper. "Wait here," she commanded, not asked, before disappearing through a frosted glass door, taking his last hope with her. Leo was left standing alone in the center of the vast lobby, a solitary, humble island in a sea of arrogance. The silence felt heavier now, charged with scrutiny. He tried to make himself smaller, to blend into the opulent surroundings, but it was impossible. He was a weed in a perfectly manicured garden. It was then that the main doors swung open with a dramatic flourish, and a new energy swept into the room. A man entered, flanked by a small entourage of people in sharp suits who laughed a little too loudly at whatever he said. He was tall, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Leo earned in a year, and he moved with an aura of absolute unshakable ownership. His face was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. This was Silas Blackwood, a name synonymous with ruthless corporate takeovers and extravagant displays of wealth. Silas paused, his gaze sweeping the lobby with the casual air of a king surveying his domain. He was a predator, and this was his hunting ground. His eyes scanned past the wealthy patrons, the busy employees, and then they landed on Leo, and they stopped. A slow, sadistic smile spread across Silas's face. He saw not a man, but an object of amusement. He saw poverty. He saw weakness. He saw a perfect target. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Silas's voice boomed across the lobby, dripping with condescending charm. The expensive silence was shattered. All eyes turned first to Silas, then followed his gaze to the mortified Leo. "Lost your way, little fellow. The service entrance is around the back." His entourage erupted in mocking laughter. It was a cruel practice sound, the laughter of hyenas circling their prey. Leo felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor. He said nothing, his gaze fixed on the ground, hoping the storm would pass. But Silas was not finished. He enjoyed this, the sadistic power of public humiliation. He strode toward Leo, his expensive shoes clicking an arrogant rhythm on the floor. He circled him like a shark, examining his worn jacket, his faded trousers, his scuffed shoes. "Look at this," Silas announced to the room, "a genuine relic of the working class, right here in the Temple of Capital. Should we have him bronzed?" More laughter, sharper this time. Leo's hands clenched into fists in his pockets. The worn paper of his grandfather's document felt like a shield, but it was thin and fragile against this onslaught. He finally looked up, meeting Silas's cold, mocking eyes. "I'm just here on business," Leo said, his voice quiet but steady. Silas threw his head back and laughed, a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "Business? What business could you possibly have here? Did you come to polish the floor with your jacket?" His gaze then fell upon the grand piano. An idea, a particularly nasty one, lit up his eyes. He gestured toward the magnificent instrument. "I see you're admiring the Steinway. A beautiful piece, isn't it? Costs more than your entire life's earnings, I imagine." Leo didn't answer. He had been looking at the piano, not with envy, but with a strange sense of familiarity, a distant echo of a memory he couldn't quite place. His fingers had twitched with an old, forgotten instinct. Silas noticed the look in his eyes. "What's the matter? You think you can play it?" he sneered. "A janitor fancies himself a musician. How utterly charming." The crowd, sensing a spectacle, drew closer. Their faces were a mixture of morbid curiosity and cruel amusement. They were sharks drawn to blood in the water. "I'll tell you what," Silas said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, loud enough for everyone to hear. He pulled out a thick crocodile leather wallet and extracted a crisp stack of bills. He fanned them out, a vibrant display of power. "This is $50,000. Real money. Probably more than you've ever seen in one place." He waved the cash under Leo's nose. "I'll make you a deal. You go up there and try to play that piano. If you can play a single recognizable song, I'll give you this." He paused for dramatic effect, his smile widening. "But when you fail, and you will fail, you will not only leave this bank immediately, you will quit your pathetic little job. You will disappear and never show your face in this part of the city again. You will accept that you are nothing and that you belong nowhere near people like us." He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "I'll pay you $50,000 to quit. To quit trying, to quit pretending you're anything more than the dirt on our shoes. What do you say, janitor? Do we have a deal?" The offer hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was a trap, a public execution disguised as a bet. To refuse was to accept his own worthlessness. To accept was to walk into certain profound humiliation. The laughter of the crowd had subsided into a tense, expectant silence. They were waiting for the final act of the tragic comedy. Leo looked at the money in Silas's hand. $50,000. It was the exact amount he needed for his grandmother's surgery. It was a miracle wrapped in a curse. He looked at Silas's arrogant, sneering face, at the circle of smug, wealthy onlookers. He thought of his grandmother's gentle smile, of her fading strength. He thought of his grandfather's stories about dignity, about standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. And in that moment, something inside him broke. The fear, the shame, the years of quiet subservience. It all shattered, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had been pushed too far. The final personal insult, the demand that he accept his own nothingness, had ignited a fire that all the money in the world could not extinguish. He lifted his chin, his eyes locking onto Silas's with an intensity that made the millionaire flinch almost imperceptibly. The timid whisper was gone, replaced by a voice that was clear, firm, and resonant. "I accept your offer." A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Silas's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the sudden defiance, before returning with even greater malice. He thought it was the desperate act of a fool. "Excellent!" Silas boomed, stepping back with a theatrical flourish. "The stage is yours, maestro. Don't disappoint your adoring public." He gestured grandly toward the piano, and his entourage resumed their cruel, hyena-like laughter. Leo ignored them. He ignored the whispers, the snickers, the pitying looks. The world seemed to narrow, the vast lobby shrinking until only he and the piano remained. He walked toward it, each step deliberate and sure. The marble was cool beneath his worn shoes. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the quiet confidence of a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He reached the piano and ran his hand over the smooth, polished wood. It felt like greeting an old friend. The keys, a perfect set of black and white teeth, seemed to beckon him. He sat down on the bench, his back straight, his posture suddenly transformed. He was no longer a hunched, invisible janitor. He was a man taking his rightful place. The laughter in the lobby died down to a low, expectant murmur. Everyone leaned in, cameras on their phones raised, ready to capture the inevitable, humiliating failure. Silas crossed his arms, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered on his face. This was going to be even more satisfying than he had imagined. Leo closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He saw his grandmother's face. He felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy. He placed his calloused, work-worn fingers on the keys. They were not the clumsy, fumbling hands of a janitor. They were the hands of an artist. Then he began to play. The first note hung in the air, pure and crystalline, cutting through the tense silence like a diamond. It was followed by another and another, a cascade of sound that was not fumbling or hesitant, but exquisitely complex and deeply emotional. It was not a simple, recognizable tune. It was a torrent, a masterpiece. The music that poured from the piano was a story. It began with a melody of profound sadness, a lament for lost time and hidden sorrow. It spoke of quiet struggles in small, lonely rooms, of bitter coffee and fading photographs. It was the sound of Leo's life, of his pain, his humility, his unwavering love for his grandmother. The low murmur in the crowd vanished, replaced by an absolute stunned silence. Phones were lowered, jaws hung open. The smug smirk on Silas Blackwood's face froze, melted, and then evaporated entirely, replaced by a mask of sheer, uncomprehending disbelief. His cruel laughter died in his throat, choked off by the sheer impossible beauty of the music. Then the melody shifted. The sadness deepened into a powerful, righteous anger. The tempo quickened, the chords becoming thunderous and defiant. It was a declaration of war. It was the sound of a spirit breaking its chains, of dignity refusing to be trampled. The music crashed through the opulent lobby like a tidal wave, washing away the arrogance and the mockery, filling every corner with its raw, undeniable power. People in the crowd began to look at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. Who was this man? Where did this incredible world-class talent come from? An elderly woman in the corner, dressed in pearls and fine silk, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, tears streaming down her face. A hardened businessman stood motionless, his face a canvas of raw emotion. Leo was no longer in the bank. He was lost in the music, his fingers flying across the keys with a grace and precision that defied belief. He was channeling years of secret practice, of lessons learned at his grandfather's knee on an old, out-of-tune upright piano in a dusty room long ago. His grandfather, a man the world had forgotten, had not just been kind. He had been a virtuoso, and he had passed his soul, his gift, to his grandson. The final movement of the piece was one of soaring, triumphant hope. It was the sound of a sunrise after a long, dark night. It was a promise of justice, a hymn of vindication. The music swelled to a final, breathtaking crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building before resolving into a single, perfect chord that resonated in the profound silence that followed. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath. Then, a single person began to clap. It was the elderly woman with the handkerchief. Her solitary applause was quickly joined by another, and then another, until the entire lobby erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous ovation. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of approval, of admiration, of apology. They were not clapping for a janitor. They were clapping for a master. Leo slowly opened his eyes, his chest heaving. He looked out at the sea of faces, no longer mocking, but filled with awe and respect. He had done it. He had not just played a song, he had revealed his soul. His gaze found Silas Blackwood. The arrogant magnate was paralyzed, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, fury, and a dawning, unwilling fear. He looked from Leo to the cheering crowd and back again, his mind unable to process what had just happened. The world had turned upside down. The ant had revealed itself to be a giant. The janitor had silenced the king. Just then, the frosted glass door to the manager's office swung open. The receptionist who had taken Leo's paper returned, followed by a distinguished-looking man in a sharp, conservative suit. He was Mr. Harrison, the director of the entire Central Branch. His face was ashen, and he was holding the crumpled paper from Leo's grandfather as if it were a sacred text. "Mr. Valdez," the bank director said, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed Leo. The use of a formal surname, a mark of respect, cut through the applause. "Leo Valdez, is that your name?" Leo nodded, slowly getting up from the piano bench. Mr. Harrison took a deep, shaky breath. He held up the paper for the entire lobby to see. "This document, this is a controlling share certificate for the original founding stock of this bank. It belonged to Eduardo Valdez." He looked at Leo, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your grandfather wasn't just a depositor here. He was the founder. He was Sterling Legacy Bank." The applause stopped instantly. A new wave of shock, 100 times more powerful than the first, crashed over the room. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any that had come before. Silas Blackwood stared, his mouth agape. His entire fortune, his entire empire was built on deals and leverage connected to this very bank. The color drained completely from his face. He looked at the humble janitor, the man he had just tried to humiliate for sport, and saw not a speck of dirt, but the ghost of the man who had built the very ground he stood upon. The war had just begun, and Silas knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had already lost. Mr. Harrison, the bank director, cleared his throat, his professional composure struggling against the tidal wave of revelation. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at Leo, then back at the paper. "Mr. Valdez," he began again, his voice now filled with a deep, profound respect. This changes everything. The shares detailed here, they represent a 51% controlling interest in the Sterling Legacy Foundation, the parent entity of this bank, and all its holdings." He took a step closer to Leo, his eyes scanning the young man's simple clothes and calloused hands with a newfound understanding. "Your grandfather, Eduardo Valdez, structured this in his will. He stipulated that the shares were to be held in a blind trust, inaccessible to anyone. Until his direct heir presented this specific certificate in person at this branch, he believed that true wealth was not in money, but in character, and that his heir should only inherit his fortune after understanding the world without it. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. The story was starting to piece itself together in their minds, a modern-day fable unfolding before their very eyes. The humble janitor was not just a gifted musician. He was the secret king, the worthy heir who had passed his ancestors' moral test. Leo himself was struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. His grandfather, the quiet man from his faded memories, the man who taught him piano on a rickety upright, was the architect of this entire empire of wealth. The stories of his kindness were not just family lore. They were the founding principles of a financial institution. He felt dizzy, the marble floor seeming to sway beneath him. His eyes drifted back to Silas Blackwood. The magnate's shock was rapidly curdling into a dark, venomous fury. This was impossible. It was a trick, a nightmare. His entire career had been built on acquiring pieces of companies connected to the Sterling Legacy Fund. He had spent years leveraging his position, bullying board members, and consolidating power. He had always been aware of the dormant majority share, a mysterious ghost in the machine that financial analysts had debated for decades. He had assumed it was lost to history, a legal anomaly. To discover that the key to it all was in the hands of this nothing, this janitor he had just tried to crush for his own amusement, was a humiliation so profound it was physically painful. It felt like a cosmic joke, and he was the punchline. "This is absurd," Silas finally spat, his voice a harsh croak. "A forgery! It has to be a forgery! Do you really believe this? This vagrant is the heir to the Valdez fortune? Look at him!" He gestured wildly at Leo, his composure shattering. "He cleans floors for a living. It's a pathetic scam." Mr. Harrison stiffened, his expression turning to ice. He was a man of procedure and legacy, and Silas's outburst was an affront to both. "I can assure you, Mr. Blackwood, our legal department has already authenticated the certificate's watermark and the signature of Eduardo Valdez. It is ironclad. Mr. Leo Valdez is, as of this moment, the majority shareholder and de facto chairman of the board." The director then turned his back on Silas, a gesture of dismissal so complete it was like a slap in the face. He focused all his attention on Leo. "Mr. Valdez, we have much to discuss. Your grandfather's private office has been maintained untouched for over 40 years. Perhaps we could speak there." Before Leo could answer, an old, frail man stepped out from the crowd. He wore a simple, well-kept suit and leaned heavily on a wooden cane. His eyes, cloudy with age, were fixed on Leo with an expression of intense emotion. "Eduardo's grandson," the old man whispered, his voice thick with feeling. He hobbled forward, bypassing the stunned security guards. "I knew it the moment I heard the music. That was his song, the Sonata of the Silent Sparrow. He wrote it for your grandmother." The old man reached Leo and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "My name is Thomas. I was your grandfather's personal assistant and his dearest friend. I have waited 40 years for this day." He looked at Leo, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "He made me promise I would be here for you when the time came. He knew a day of reckoning would arrive." Thomas then turned his gaze toward Silas Blackwood, and his gentle expression hardened into one of cold, ancient fury. "And he knew it would be because of him." Silas flinched as if struck. I don't know what you're talking about, old man, he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't you? Tomas retorted, his voice gaining strength. You destroyed countless lives to build your hollow empire, Blackwood, but you made one fatal mistake. You started by destroying the wrong man. You thought you had ruined Eduardo Valdez, forcing him into an early grave with your lies and corporate sabotage. You stole his smaller, independent projects, leaving him with nothing but his secret primary legacy. The revelation hit the room like a second thunderclap. This was not just a random encounter between the rich and the poor. This was personal. It was a story of betrayal, of a crime committed a generation ago whose consequences were only now coming to light. The conflict was not about a piano or a bet. It was about a blood feud. My grandfather, Leo whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place, the sadness in his family, the unspoken tragedy that always lingered beneath the surface. He died of a broken heart, didn't he? He did, Tomas said softly, turning back to Leo. Blackwood, a young, ruthless upstart at the time, spread vicious rumors and fabricated evidence of fraud that shattered your grandfather's reputation and cost him his public partnerships. The world turned its back on him. But Eduardo was smarter than any of them. He had already protected his core legacy, the very heart of the bank, in a way no one could touch. He put it in trust for you, believing that one day his bloodline would reclaim his honor. Tomas reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned mobile phone. Your grandfather didn't just leave you his fortune, Leo. He left you an army. He pressed a single button on the phone. The time has come, he said into the device, his voice ringing with authority. The sparrow has landed. Silas Blackwood, sensing the tide turning irrevocably against him, began to panic. His mind raced, searching for an escape, a counterattack. Humiliation was one thing, ruin was another. He would not be brought down by a dead man's ghost and a pathetic janitor. This is a conspiracy, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Thomas and Leo. A pathetic attempt to seize control of my assets. I have contracts. I have lawyers. You will not get away with this. He turned to Mr. Harrison. As a major stakeholder in several of this bank's subsidiary funds, I demand you freeze all accounts related to this farce until my legal team can properly investigate. But his power, once absolute in this lobby, was gone. The sycophantic laughter of his entourage had long since vanished, replaced by nervous glances and a desire to be anywhere else. They began to subtly distance themselves from him, melting back into the crowd. Your authority here is limited, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Harrison stated coldly. Mr. Valdez is the authority now. Silas, realizing his threats were useless here, decided to change tactics. He would fight this battle on another front. He sneered at Leo, a mask of bravado slipping back over his panic. Enjoy your little fantasy, janitor. This building might have been your grandfather's, but the world outside it is mine. You have no idea the enemies you've just made. He spun on his heel and stormed toward the exit, his exit as dramatic as his entrance, but for entirely different reasons. He shoved through the crowd, a man fleeing the scene of his own downfall. As he burst through the doors and into the daylight, he was already dialing his lawyer, his mind churning with schemes of retaliation, of bribery, of intimidation. He would crush this boy. He would destroy the school where he worked, discredit the hospital caring for his grandmother, and bury him in litigation until he begged for mercy. The war was far from over. It had just moved to a new, dirtier battlefield. Back in the lobby, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd buzzed with the story they had just witnessed. Reporters, having gotten wind of the commotion, were already gathering outside, their cameras pressed against the glass. Leo stood in the center of it all, feeling like the quiet eye of a hurricane. Mr. Tomas's hand was still on his shoulder, a warm, grounding presence. "What now?" Leo asked, his voice barely audible. Tomas smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "Now we honor your grandfather's legacy, and we finish what he started." He gestured toward the elevator. "First, let's go see his office. There are things you need to see, and people you need to meet." As they walked toward the elevator, past the awestruck faces of the bank staff and patrons, Leo caught his reflection in the polished brass doors. He still wore the same threadbare jacket, the same worn-out shoes. But he was not the same man who had walked in an hour ago. The invisible janitor was gone. In his place stood an heir, a warrior, a legacy made flesh. And he was ready. The private elevator ascended in a smooth, silent rush. It was an old-fashioned car, all polished mahogany and soft leather, a relic from a more elegant era. Mr. Harrison stood stiffly in one corner, a silent sentinel, while Thomas stood beside Leo, his presence a comforting warmth. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," Thomas said, his voice soft. "He saw the rot in the world of finance long before anyone else. He saw men like Silas Blackwood for what they were, locusts, consuming everything and creating nothing." The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open, revealing not a modern corporate floor, but a quiet, book-lined hallway. It felt like stepping back in time. At the end of the hall was a single, heavy oak door with a simple brass plate that read, "E. Valdez." Mr. Harrison used a heavy, ornate key to unlock it. The lock turned with a satisfying, deep click. He pushed the door open and stepped aside. "As promised," the director said, his voice hushed with reverence. "Untouched for 40 years." Leo stepped inside. The office was a perfect time capsule. A large mahogany desk stood before a vast window that overlooked the city. The chairs were worn leather, the shelves were filled with books on philosophy and economics, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and pipe tobacco. On the wall hung not charts and graphs, but framed photographs of smiling workers from construction sites and factories, the people whose labor had built the city. On the desk, placed squarely in the center, was a single sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my grandson." Leo's hand trembled as he reached for it. "Read it later," Tomas advised gently. "First, you need to understand the army your grandfather built for you." Tomas gestured to a small, unassuming filing cabinet in the corner. Eduardo knew Blackwood's greed was a bottomless pit. He knew one day Blackwood would overreach, and that his own legacy would be the final battleground. So he prepared. He opened a drawer which was filled not with financial records, but with dozens of thick, neatly labeled folders. Your grandfather used his personal, untraceable funds to help people. Good, honest people who were being crushed by predators like Blackwood. He gave them interest-free loans to save their businesses, paid their medical bills, funded their children's education. He asked for nothing in return except for one thing. Tomas pulled out a folder. The label read, "Marquez Bakery." He asked them to keep a record, to document everything, every kindness, every transaction, and to document the crimes of the men who put them in that desperate position in the first place. He opened the folder. Inside were old receipts, notarized letters of gratitude, and a detailed handwritten account from a man named Hector Marcus, describing how a predatory loan orchestrated by a shell corporation owned by Silas Blackwood had almost driven his family's century-old bakery into bankruptcy until a secret benefactor, Eduardo Valdez, had saved them. "There are hundreds of these," Tomas said, his voice ringing with pride. "A silent army of the grateful, bakers, doctors, teachers, small-time builders, people Blackwood dismissed as ants. But your grandfather knew that together an army of ants can bring down a lion." As if on cue, Mr. Harrison's phone buzzed. He answered it, his expression grim. "Yes, I see. Put her through." He held the phone out to Leo. "It's for you, a Principal Diana Sterling, from the Northwood Community School." Leo took the phone, confused. "Hello? Mr. Valdez?" The voice on the other end was strained, filled with anxiety. I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Diana Sterling. I'm the principal at the school where you work. Or worked." "What's wrong, Principal Sterling?" Leo asked, a sense of dread creeping over him. "It's Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He just called me. He knows your grandmother is ill. He knows you're trying to save her. He also knows our school is struggling, that we're on the verge of losing our funding." She took a shaky breath. "He told me that unless I publicly issue a statement discrediting you, saying you were fired for theft, that you're unstable, he will personally ensure our school is shut down by the end of the month. He said he would pull every string he has with the city council." Leo's blood ran cold. Silas wasn't just fighting him. He was targeting everyone and everything Leo cared about. He was trying to isolate him, to poison the very ground he stood on. It was a cruel, vicious tactic designed to break his spirit. "What did you tell him?" Leo asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. There was a pause, and then Principal Sterling's voice returned, the anxiety replaced by a firm resolve that mirrored Leo's own. "I told him that Leo Valdez is the most honorable and hard-working man I have ever had the privilege of employing. I told him that our school would rather shut its doors with dignity than participate in his disgusting campaign of slander, and then I told him to go to hell." A wave of immense gratitude washed over Leo. He was not alone in this fight. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Principal Sterling. You won't regret this, I promise." "I know I won't, Leo," she replied warmly. "Now, what can we do to help?" Leo looked at Thomas, who was smiling, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. The first soldier of the Silent Army had just reported for duty, without even being called. "Just be ready," Leo said into the phone. "The truth is coming." He hung up and looked at the filing cabinet, at the rows of folders containing the stories of his grandfather's secret kindness. This was his inheritance. Not the money, not the power, but this legacy of goodwill. This was his arsenal. Meanwhile, in a penthouse office across the city, Silas Blackwood slammed his phone down with a roar of fury. The principal's defiance had enraged him. How dare she? How dare any of these insignificant people defy him? "Useless!" he seethed to his lawyer, a slick, nervous man named Fletcher. "They're all sentimental fools. Fine. If they want to play dirty, we'll show them what dirty really is." Silas began to pace his office like a caged tiger, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to his rage. I want everything we have on the Valdez family. Every skeleton, every rumor, every unpaid bill. I want a full-scale assault on the grandmother. Find out which hospital she's in. Let's have the board review her eligibility for treatment. Let's see how brave the janitor is when his grandmother is kicked to the curb." Fletcher paled. "Silas, that's crossing a line. It could backfire. Public sympathy—" "I don't care about public sympathy," Silas roared, sweeping a crystal glass from his desk. It shattered against the wall. "I care about winning. I built this empire from nothing, and I will not have it stolen by some sob story and a piano-playing pauper. Find me leverage, Fletcher, now!" Fletcher, intimidated, nodded quickly and scurried away to do his master's bidding. Silas stood at the window, breathing heavily, his reflection a mask of pure hatred. He had underestimated the janitor. He had underestimated the ghost of Eduardo Valdez. He would not make that mistake again. He would burn the whole city to the ground before he let them win. The battle for Sterling legacy was about to become a war of annihilation. Back in Eduardo Valdez's office, the atmosphere was one of quiet, strategic preparation. Thomas had spread the contents of several folders across the large mahogany desk. They were creating a map of Silas Blackwood's sins, a web of deceit and cruelty that spanned decades. "Here," Tomas said, pointing to a set of documents. "This is from a Dr. Aris Thorne, a brilliant oncologist. Blackwood bought the small, innovative research company he worked for, stripped it for its patents, and then bankrupted it, destroying years of cancer research. Your grandfather secretly funded Dr. Thorne's new independent lab. Dr. Thorne has been waiting for this call for 20 years. He pushed another folder forward. "And this. The entire community of Oak Ridge. Blackwood's chemical plant polluted their water supply, causing a cluster of illnesses. He used a legion of lawyers to silence them, paying them off with pennies. Your grandfather established a trust that has been quietly paying their medical expenses ever since. They have meticulously documented proof of the pollution, evidence Blackwood thought he had buried forever." Leo listened, his heart a painful mix of sorrow and pride. His grandfather had been a silent guardian, a phantom of justice moving through the city's dark places. He had not fought his enemy with anger, but with meticulous, compassionate opposition. He knew Blackwood's weakness, Tomas explained. It's his arrogance. He believes everyone he has ever stepped on is gone forever. He never looks back. He never imagines they would remember, let alone fight back. The phone on the desk, a vintage rotary model, suddenly rang, its shrill, old-fashioned bell cutting through the silence. Mr. Harrison, who had been coordinating with the bank's legal team, answered it. He listened for a moment, his face growing grim. "It's Blackwood," he announced to the room. "He's not waiting. He's called an emergency meeting of the board of Sterling Legacy's primary investment fund for tomorrow morning. He's going to try and force a vote to invalidate your claim before you can consolidate your position." "So soon?" Leo asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "He's a cornered animal," Tomas said calmly. "They are most dangerous right before the end. He thinks he can use his network of cronies on the board, men he has put in his debt over the years, to stage a corporate coup." "What's his play?" Leo asked. Mr. Harrison spoke up. "Our sources say he's fabricated a report, a massive consolidated debt obligation that he claims your grandfather's estate owes to one of his shell corporations. It's a fiction, a complex web of lies. but it's designed to look plausible enough to spook the board. He'll claim your inheritance is worthless, a net liability, and that for the stability of the bank, his faction must be given control. It was a classic Silas Blackwood move, bold, deceitful, and designed for maximum chaos. He was trying to win by creating a fire and positioning himself as the only one who could put it out. Leo looked at the folders on the desk, at the faces of the people in the photographs on the wall. He thought of Principal Sterling's defiance, of his grandmother's quiet strength. His own fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. "He thinks this is a battle of numbers on a spreadsheet," Leo said, his voice steady. "He's wrong. This is a battle for the soul of this company, for my grandfather's name." He turned to Tomas. "Make the calls. It's time to assemble the army." Tomas nodded, a fierce pride in his eyes. He picked up his old phone and began to dial. "Hector, it's Thomas. The time has come. Yes, the bakery. Be at the Sterling Tower tomorrow at 9. Bring everything." He made another call. "Dr. Thorne? Thomas. The Sparrow has landed. Yes, the research. The main boardroom. Bring your data." Call after call. The message was the same. A quiet network of gratitude, dormant for decades, sparked to life across the city. A baker, a doctor, a teacher, a union foreman, a small-town mayor. They were all cogs in a machine of justice that Eduardo Valdez had built long ago, and now its gears were beginning to turn. The formal showdown was set for the next morning. The Sterling Tower was besieged by media. News vans lined the street, and reporters shouted questions as the board members, a collection of grim-faced men and women in expensive suits, filed into the building. They were nervous, caught between the established power of Silas Blackwood and the seismic, unbelievable story of the Janitor heir. Silas Blackwood arrived last, a portrait of defiant confidence. He strode through the media scrum, a predatory smile on his face. "Today, we will restore order," he announced to the cameras. "We will expose this fraudulent charade and protect the integrity of this institution from opportunists." He was playing his role to perfection, the savior of the company he was secretly trying to devour. The main boardroom was an intimidating space on the highest floor. A colossal marble table dominated the room, surrounded by leather chairs. One entire wall was a window offering a godlike view of the city below. The air was thick with tension. Silas took his seat at the head of the table, his usual spot. He arranged his files, projecting an aura of complete control. His cronies on the board offered him slight, conspiratorial nods. They believed they had the votes. They believed this would be a swift, brutal execution. Then the doors opened, and Leo entered. He was not alone. He was flanked by Mr. Tomas and the bank's director, Mr. Harrison. But behind them walked a quiet, diverse procession. There was Hector Marquez, the baker, his hands dusted with a faint trace of flour. There was Dr. Eris Thorne, carrying a heavy briefcase. There was Principal Diana Sterling, her face resolute. And behind them, a dozen more, the silent army of the grateful, their faces etched with the memory of past injustices and the hope for a final reckoning. A wave of confusion washed over the board members. Who were these ordinary people? What were they doing in this sanctum of power? Silas sneered. "What is this, Janitor? Did you bring your fan club? This is a private board meeting, not a circus. Get these people out of here." "They are here as witnesses," Leo said, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the tense room. He took his place, not at the head of the table, but in a simple chair along the side, as if to say he was not there to rule, but to serve justice. They are here to provide context. Silas laughed, a short, ugly bark. The only context that matters is this. He slapped a thick, professionally bound report onto the table. My final gambit. This is a full accounting of the liabilities attached to the Valdez estate, a debt of $200 million owed to my holding company for a series of failed joint ventures with Eduardo Valdez, ventures he foolishly guaranteed with his sterling legacy stock. He slid copies of the report down the table. The janitor hasn't inherited a fortune. He's inherited a catastrophic debt. His controlling shares are worthless until this debt is paid. For the sake of financial stability, I propose the board vote to transfer the shares to my company to settle the debt, thereby neutralizing the threat and securing our future. It was a masterful lie, wrapped in the convincing language of finance. The board members began to murmur, their faces growing pale as they scanned the intimidating figures. Silas's allies on the board nodded gravely. "A compelling fiction," Tomas said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "It's all here in black and white, old man," Silas retorted, tapping the report. "Audited and verified. An unbeatable final move." Leo stood up. He did not look at the report. He looked at the faces of the board members one by one. "Mr. Blackwood speaks of numbers," he said. "I would like to speak of value." He gestured to Hector Marquez. The baker stepped forward, placing a simple, worn ledger on the polished table. It looked comically out of place. "This is the real ledger," Hector said, his voice strong. "It shows how my family's business was saved by a loan from Eduardo Valdez after a predatory contract from one of Mr. Blackwood's shell companies tried to ruin us. It also shows that the failed venture Mr. Blackwood mentions in his report was, in fact, our bakery, which he tried and failed to acquire." Next, Dr. Thorne stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of scientific papers and a small USB drive. "The failed biotech firm listed as another of my grandfather's debts," Leo continued, "was Dr. Thorne's research company. Mr. Blackwood acquired it, sold off its assets for a profit, and then claimed it as a loss. This drive contains the company's real financial data, which Dr. Thorne wisely backed up, proving it was profitable until the day Mr. Blackwood dismantled it. It also contains proof he stole the patents." One by one, the members of the silent army came forward. The mayor of Oak Ridge presented irrefutable evidence of the chemical pollution and the subsequent cover-up, linking the shell company responsible directly to Silas's Central Holding Group. Principal Sterling submitted a sworn affidavit about Silas's attempt to blackmail her, an act of corporate intimidation that caused several board members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was a systematic, methodical dismantling of Silas Blackwood's entire narrative. Leo's counterattack was not a complex financial argument, but a simple, devastating presentation of the truth, delivered by the very people Silas had tried to crush. The fabricated report was exposed not just as a lie, but as an insult to the memory of the lives he had damaged. The faces of the board members transformed from nervousness to disgust, then to cold fury. The men who had been Silas's allies moments before now stared at him with contempt. They were ruthless capitalists, yes, but they were not monsters. They had been played, and they knew it. This is an outrage," one of the oldest board members stammered, throwing the report onto the floor. This is not business. This is pure villainy. Silas was trapped. The walls were closing in. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, sweat beading on his forehead. Lies. All of it. A coordinated attack by a group of irrelevant, bitter failures, he rasped. But his voice was hollow. The bravado was gone, leaving only desperate, cornered panic. Mr. Harrison, the bank director, stood up, his face like stone. The evidence presented here is compelling. In light of this and Mr. Blackwood's attempt to defraud this board, I call for an immediate, unanimous vote. All in favor of rejecting Mr. Blackwood's proposal, stripping him of all board positions related to this bank, and launching a full-scale criminal investigation into his business practices. Say, aye. Aye. The word came from every board member, a single, powerful, unified voice of condemnation. Even Silas's former cronies joined in, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. It was a unanimous verdict. The sound of the vote was the death knell of Silas Blackwood's empire. It was over. He stared blankly at the board, at Leo, at the silent army standing behind him. His enemies were not failures. They were survivors, and their memory was long. Security guards entered the room, their faces grim. "Mr. Blackwood," one of them said, his voice devoid of deference, "it's time for you to leave." Silas stood up, his body moving like a broken automaton. He didn't say a word. The arrogance, the power, the cruelty, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. He walked toward the door, his head bowed, his footsteps heavy. He was no longer a king. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life. As he left the room, he passed Leo, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. In Leo's gaze, there was no triumph, no gloating. There was only a quiet, sad pity. Silas flinched and looked away, unable to bear it. He walked out of the boardroom, defeated, humiliated, and utterly alone. Outside the room, he was met not by fawning assistants, but by federal agents, alerted by the bank's legal team. The freezing of his assets had already begun. The public exposure was imminent. His downfall was complete, swift, and absolute. Back in the boardroom, a sense of profound relief settled over the room. The board members, one by one, came to Leo, shaking his hand, offering their apologies and their support. The storm had passed. Leo looked at Thomas, at the faces of the grateful people his grandfather had saved. They had not just won a corporate battle, they had redeemed a legacy. Later that day, after the whirlwind of legal formalities and press statements, Leo found himself alone again in his grandfather's office. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of diamonds. The $50,000 Silas had arrogantly offered him now seemed like a pittance, a meaningless token from a forgotten battle. The real prize was this room, this legacy, this chance to heal the wounds of the past. His first call was to the hospital. He spoke to his grandmother's surgeon, his voice thick with emotion as he authorized the full payment for her surgery and post-operative care using the first disbursement from his grandfather's personal accounts. The weight that he had carried for so long, the crushing burden of that impossible sum, simply lifted. For the first time in years, he felt light. His second call was to Principal Diana Sterling. "I promised you wouldn't regret your decision," he said, a smile in his voice. "The Sterling Legacy Foundation is making an immediate, unconditional donation of $5 million to the Northwood Community School, and we are establishing a permanent endowment to ensure it never has to worry about funding again. On the other end of the line, there was a stunned silence, followed by a choked sob of pure, unadulterated joy. He was not just fixing a problem, he was building a future. It was the first benevolent act of many, the first brick in a new legacy he would build upon the foundations his grandfather had laid. He was not corrupted by his newfound power. He was ennobled by it. With the most important calls made, Leo finally sat down at the great mahogany desk. The city spread out before him, no longer an intimidating landscape of power, but a community of stories, of struggles, of people he could now help. He picked up the sealed envelope his grandfather had left for him. His fingers, no longer trembling, broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in his grandfather's elegant, looping handwriting. "My dearest grandson," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found your way here, and you have done so with honor. It means you have faced the world without the shield of wealth, and have not lost your soul. I am prouder of you than words can ever say." Leo felt a tear trace a path down his cheek, the first he had allowed himself to shed. It was a release of years of pent-up pain, of quiet struggle, of loneliness. "I did not leave you money," the letter continued. "Money is a tool, and it can be a dangerous one. I left you a responsibility. The names in the filing cabinet are not a list of debtors, but a family of allies. The shares are not a source of power, but a shield to protect the good people of this city from the greed of men like Blackwood, a man whose darkness I fought and, in a way, lost too in my own lifetime. Do not make my mistake, Leo. I hid my wealth, thinking it would protect it. But wealth that is hidden cannot do good. It cannot build schools or heal the sick. True legacy is not what you keep, it is what you give away. It is the kindness that echoes in rooms you have long since left. It is the gratitude that lives in the hearts of others. That is the only interest that truly compounds. Play the piano, love your family, be kind, and use what I have left you to build a better, fairer world. That is the only victory that matters. Your talent was my gift to you. Your character is your gift to the world. Do not waste it. With all my love, your grandfather, Eduardo. Leo folded the letter, his heart full. The pain of the past was finally healing, replaced by a profound sense of peace and purpose. The ghost of his grandfather was no longer a sad memory, but a guiding star. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. It was not a kingdom to be ruled, but a garden to be tended. The harvest, he knew, would be eternal. 10 years later. The Northwood Community School was no longer a struggling institution on the verge of collapse. It was a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a state-of-the-art facility with gleaming new buildings, a thriving arts program, and the best teachers in the city. In the center of its new courtyard stood a beautiful bronze statue, not of a military hero or a politician, but of a simple, smiling man holding a piece of sheet music. The plaque read, "Eduardo Valdez, the gardener who plants trees whose shade he knows he shall never sit in." Leo Valdez was not the man the world of finance had expected him to be. He did not appear on the covers of magazines or in lists of the world's richest men. He had quietly restructured the Sterling Legacy Foundation, turning it from a purely profit-driven entity into the largest philanthropic organization in the country. Its mission was simple: to invest in people. The Valdez Foundation funded scholarships for underprivileged students, provided seed money for ethical small businesses, and built free health clinics in neighborhoods that needed them most. Leo himself remained a deeply private figure, preferring the quiet satisfaction of his work to the glare of the public eye. He still lived modestly, his greatest luxury the grand piano that now sat in his comfortable but unpretentious home. His grandmother, healthy and vibrant, lived with him, her laughter filling the house. One crisp autumn afternoon, Leo was visiting a university where his foundation was sponsoring a major scholarship program. As he walked through the campus, he saw a young student sitting alone on a bench, a thick, expensive-looking textbook open on her lap. She was staring at a page with an expression of intense frustration and despair. Her clothes were neat but clearly worn, and she had the same tired, determined look in her eyes that Leo remembered seeing in his own reflection all those years ago. He approached her gently. "Is everything all right?" he asked. The student looked up, startled. "Oh, yes, I'm fine. It's just this book." She sighed, gesturing to the heavy volume. "It's required for my advanced economics class. It costs $400. I can't afford it, so I have to spend hours in the library every day just to keep up, but I can only borrow it for 2 hours at a time." She gave a small, defeated shrug. "I'll figure it out. I always do." Leo smiled, a warm, genuine smile. It was a perfect echo of the past, a full-circle moment that resonated deep in his soul. He saw himself in her, the same quiet pride, the same refusal to complain despite the crushing weight of circumstance. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she replied. "Well, Clara," Leo said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a simple business card and a pen. On the back of the card, he wrote a short note and signed it. He handed it to her. "Take this to the campus bookstore. Give it to the manager. They'll know what to do." Clara looked at the card. It simply read, "Leo Valdez, the Valdez Foundation." She looked back at him confused. "But why?" "Because a long time ago," Leo said, his voice soft with memory, "a man I never got to thank properly taught me that the best investment you can ever make is in someone else's potential. I'm just paying it forward." He turned and walked away before she could protest, leaving her staring at the card, a seed of hope planted where despair had been only moments before. He knew that the card would not only get her the book she needed, but would also enroll her in a special grant program that would cover all her expenses until graduation. It was a small act, a quiet kindness, but it was the engine of his grandfather's legacy and his own. As for Silas Blackwood, his fate served as a final, bitter cautionary tale about the true nature of bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy. After his public downfall, he was prosecuted for fraud, racketeering, and a dozen other crimes brought to light by the evidence from Leo's silent army. His fortune was seized to pay restitution to the countless people and companies he had destroyed. He was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. The Valdez Foundation, in a final act of radical compassion that stunned the business world, made an offer to Blackwood upon his release after serving his full term. They offered him a second chance, a modest, anonymous job within one of their charitable programs, a chance to spend the rest of his days contributing something of value to the world. Silas, a broken, bitter old man, was too proud to accept. He chose to live out his remaining years in obscurity and poverty, haunted by the ghost of the janitor who had defeated him, forever unable to comprehend a world where kindness was a stronger currency than greed. He had lost everything, but his arrogance, the very thing that had caused his ruin, was the last thing he possessed, and he clung to it until the very end. Leo stood on the hill overlooking the city, the evening breeze cool against his face. He thought of the young student, Clara, and the countless others like her whose paths he could now clear. He had learned the most important lesson his grandfather had tried to teach him, that true wealth is not measured in what you have, but in the good you do with it. The laughter in the bank lobby had long since faded, but the music of his legacy would play on forever.